friends and net aspirants, welcome back to High Point again. So in this video we are going to learn about Shakespearean criticism. In the previous video we have seen Shakespearean theatre or Shakespeare Elizabethan theatre, its structure, its various peculiarities and practices, and also Shakespearean comedy, tragedy, problem plays, Roman plays, and also tragic comedies, so historical plays as well. So yeah, about Shakespeare, like I said, I have given immense and sufficient, simply explained, comprehensive, well arranged audio lectures in my website www.highpoint.in, not only about Shakespeare but also about all the major and minor literary authors and literary persons and works. I have given immense materials related to UGC NET English language and literature in my website. Don't forget to join the WhatsApp group. The link is there in the description box. There you will get, in through that group you will get daily quizzes and notes, study cards, and many more things, and personal assistance. Even if you want to know how you have to study for your UGC NET JRF, you can obviously message me and call me in that number as well, that is given on the screen. Yeah, that's all. Let's begin our video about Shakespearean criticism. This is not going to be very long or lethargic or very lengthy video, but it will be very short video in which I'll be discussing, or I'll be telling some details about the Shakespearean criticism that followed the year, or that followed the age of Shakespeare. Okay, as Shakespeare is living and producing plays, he faced some criticism, but in the following ages after Shakespeare, there were some Shakespearean critic emerged that they were finding fault as well as merits and demerits related to Shakespearean drama and verse composition. So let's see all of them in brief, and I will be towards the end, I will be telling about Shakespearean critic and their major works related to Shakespearean criticism. That will be a real help for you. So don't skip the video and watch it full. Okay. So Shakespeare faced criticism for his plays when he was alive. So Shakespeare was a very popular, rich, and he was a giant of the genre drama. So Shakespeare, he was popular during his time, and he was rich during his time itself, because as a playwright. So Shakespeare, when he was living as a playwright, he faced criticism, and the university wits in general, especially Robert Greene in particular, was terribly poised against Shakespeare. So university wits, they are also known as pre-Shakespearean dramatic persons. So the university wits, they are a group of dramatic artists or dramatic playwright that was there in during the Elizabethan age. Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, Thomas Nash, Thomas Kidd, all belong to university wits, that group. So especially university wits, that particular group, and also particularly Robert Greene, he was terribly, and he was totally against Shakespeare. And Greene held that Shakespeare was a great imitator of the dramatic methodology of the play they wrote. That means, university which started their writing, their literary career as dramatists before Shakespeare, and Greene criticized Shakespeare that he is a great imitator. Shakespeare is a great imitator of the dramatic methodologies of the plays that they wrote. They means university wits wrote. Okay, because of that, because of Shakespeare's imitation of their dramatic methodologies, their styles and all, Greene criticized Shakespeare. And Ben Jonson also scoffed at Shakespeare's diminutive scholarship and scanty Latin and Greek. So, when I was discussing about Shakespeare, little was known about Shakespeare's education. Okay, so we assume that he had his education, school education, in the local grammar school. So Ben Jonson also scoffed and mocked, and he always criticized Shakespeare about his little scholarship and scanty and very meager Latin and Greek knowledge. John Dryden, in the later age, John Dryden belongs to the age of Restoration. He said that Shakespeare had the largest and most comprehensive soul. So he was positive about Shakespeare's composition and all. Unlike his contemporaries, John Dryden, he himself was a great dramatist and a poet and critic and all. And John Dryden is considered as the father of English criticism, and John Dryden said about Shakespeare that Shakespeare had the largest and most comprehensive soul, that he could understand human emotions well more than any other literary persons that ever happened to had. So Shakespeare's poetry as the expressive language of what was dramatized astounded Dryden. So what actually fascinated Dryden about Shakespeare's composition? So especially he talked about Shakespeare's poetry, sonnets, and poetical treatises. Shakespeare's poetry as the expressive language of what was dramatized. Okay, so whatever he was telling and dramatizing, and his expressive language, through that expressive language, that fascinated and astounded Dryden. By seeing that expressive language of Shakespearean composition, Dryden and he called Shakespeare as the divine Shakespeare, the father of a dramatic poets. So Dryden called Shakespeare as the divine Shakespeare, the father of a dramatic poets. And as a critic, Dryden was unbiased. So we see that Dryden is labeling Shakespeare, he's calling Shakespeare divine, and he was astounded by the expressive language that Shakespeare had in his composition and all. But Dryden was very unbiased when he was doing criticism of Shakespearean works, and for he did not spare Shakespeare of his faults. Okay, so even though he is citing his major qualities, Shakespearean qualities, but still he was not unbiased, he was not sided with that, but he never spared Shakespeare for his faults, for his wrongdoings in his composition, such as lack of judgment, reason, and intractable fancy. So for his fancifulness and for his less reason, or lack of rationality and also lack of judgment. So these are the negatives and demerits that Dryden found in Shakespearean works. So that he that he clearly cited in his criticism, not only Shakespeare's merits only. The editors of Shakespeare's plays became sensitive to Dryden's suggestions and subsequently carried them out. After Shakespeare, there were many editors for Shakespearean plays as they were publishing various volumes of Shakespearean plays. Editors were there, and editors were that followed Dryden. So they considered Dryden's suggestions, and they were sensitive to Dryden's suggestions, and subsequently they carried them out. So these Shakespearean editors, they carried these suggestions by Dryden seriously after whenever they were publishing Shakespearean plays in volumes. Another person who criticized Shakespeare was that Thomas Raymer. Thomas Raymer's short view of tragedy lambasted Shakespeare's tragedies as farce. He was critical about Shakespearean tragedies, and he even called Raymer even called Shakespearean tragedies as farce. Farcical composition means it's like below comedy. There is nothing serious about it, nothing, only very absurd, and not absurd but ridiculing actions we could only see in farce. And also Raymer called Shakespearean tragedies as farce. And another critic, Dennis highlighted Shakespeare's ignorance of the classical and his total relegation of poetic justice in his plays. So he says that Denis says that he especially particularly pointed out and highlighted Shakespeare's ignorance of the classics. So he was not a master of classics, even though he makes allusions and he tells about mythical and classical things in his works, but still he was much more ignorant about the classical works and classical language. Shakespeare was much ignorant about that, and his total relegation of poetic justice. So he was quite away from poetic justice in many of his plays. Poetic justice means, usually as audience and all, we will always hope that good will get rewarded and also the bad will get punishments at the end of the play, at the end of the action, but that never happens in some of his works. So such kind of poetic justice we cannot find in some of his works. So Shakespeare's ignorance and his relegation about poetic justice in his plays, that are actually highlighted by Dennis. Following Age of Elizabeth, Dryden, Alexander Pope, Samuel Johnson were done the major Elizabethan criticism. Dryden, like I said, he belongs to the Age of Restoration. Alexander Pope and Samuel Johnson belong to the Age of Neoclassicism. So after the Age of after the Age of Elizabeth, Dryden, Alexander Pope, Samuel Johnson, these were the major Shakespearean critics. Only during the Romantic Age did the psychological dimensions add to the Shakespearean plays. So nowadays we are discussing too much about the mentality and the psychographical and psychological dimensions of characters, even the dramatist as well, even the literary person whoever composed a particular work and all. Psychological dimensions to the various elements of Shakespearean plays were only added during the Romantic Age, and Pope didn't call his characters as mere imitations. Alexander Pope of the Neoclassical Age, he didn't call his characters means Shakespearean characters, as mere imitation of the pre-Shakespearean dramatic artists. And but Pope found the plots and contrived language of Shakespeare unacceptable and artificial. While Pope was citing merits of Shakespeare, Pope was also critical about the some shrinked plots and contrived language that Shakespeare used throughout his plays, which was unacceptable, and Pope considered them artificial. Another criticism we can find in Johnson's preface to Shakespeare. This was a work that we all studied in our criticism paper in our MA classes. He makes an elaborate study of Shakespeare while he was writing Lives of Poet. He has to write a preface to each person, each literary person. But when Samuel Johnson wrote about Shakespeare and preface to Shakespeare's life, it became so lengthy that he published that preface itself as another work of criticism. So after Pope, we can find a relevant criticism of Shakespearean works, Shakespearean drama in Samuel Johnson while he was writing preface to Shakespeare, and cognizance Johnson took cognizance of Shakespeare's presentation of nature by blending the tragic and the comic, the serious and the gay. So basically, everybody, even foreign critics, criticized Shakespeare's blending and mixing of comic and tragic as well as serious and gay things together. But here, Ben Jonson took the side of Shakespeare and he said that that is more natural way of presenting something, because our life is like that. By nature, it is a blend of both comic and tragic as well as serious and gay. So in that way, Shakespearean drama presentations are more natural, and he was giving merit to Shakespeare for blending tragic and the comic as well as the serious and the gay. And he also found that Shakespeare lacked moralistic vision and well-knit plot, while Samuel Johnson was citing many merits and natural things related to his plays, Shakespearean plays, but he also found faults with Shakespeare when he lacked moralistic vision and well-knit plots. He criticized that towards the end of tragedies we can see that a hurry we can see in plots in order to resolve everything, in order to end everything. So it's like it's not a well knit plot. His drama, especially tragedies, lack some clarity and moralistic vision as well. And Johnson well disposed towards Shakespeare's use of language. So he was also criticizing his use of language at times because he was so much in love with puns, quibbles, oxymorons, juggleries. He was playing with the words unnecessarily. There will be a character in the play that will be the mouthpiece of the Shakespeare, who loves puns, quibbles, oxymoron, and juggleries. So Shakespeare gave much space for these things in his plays, which were unacceptable and which were not at all good practice for a playwright, according to Samuel Johnson. And last 3 decades of the 18th century, much attention was devoted towards Shakespeare's characterization and imagery. So mainly about Shakespeare, a shift was occurred in Shakespearean criticism that critics towards the last decades of the 18th century, they began to talk about the characterization and imagery in Shakespeare's plays, other than his language, his wordplay, his expressive language and plots. Okay, and Walter Wither, another critic, Shakespearean critic, he said that in Specimen of Commentary. He says about imagery and characterization in Shakespeare's plays, hypothetical criticism as to how Shakespeare's characters would have behaved in other situations other than those in stage also started surfacing. So, like I said, psychological dimension to Shakespearean plays and characters were given during the Romantic age, especially. So, hypothetical criticism is a criticism that talks about or that analyze how Shakespearean characters will enact in real life or in another situation other than those in the stage. So whether this is feasible, the character will be having the same kind of action, same kind of things in real life if such a situation arises. So such kind of hypothetical criticism was also there around Shakespearean characters and action that was also started to surface. And while Bradley took to this hypothetical side also in his criticism on Shakespeare, T.S. Eliot gave out a warning against this on the ground that this would digress the reader's attention. Okay, so Bradley also he was doing lot of hypothetical criticism around Shakespearean characters as he was analyzing how this character will enact or engage in action in another situation other than the situation on the stage or in real life. How will such a character will enact? But T.S. Eliot he warns against such a criticism, such hypothetical criticism, because we are watching a fictional thing. Okay, we are watching a fictional setting that is there on the stage. So when we do hypothetical criticism and when the readers know about such hypothetical criticism and analysis, it gives every other chance for the reader to digress his or her attention that is not needed. So T.S. Eliot cited that particular point. And scientific bent of thinking was developing after the advent of Romanticism in England, and critics felt the need to examine Shakespeare's works in whole and recognizing his chronological development. So scientific analysis, scientific, if this particular element that was discussing, whether that was really present during that era, or it's like whether this particular scientific element was there in that historical play when the actual action was happening in the distant time. So that way scientific bend, scientific side of thinking was developed, or it came into being in Shakespearean criticism only after the coming of Romanticism in England, and also critics began to felt the need of examining Shakespeare's work in whole as a whole work. Shakespeare's work in whole means every other work by Shakespeare they analyzed it together, not considering each work individually. That's how the four period of Shakespearean literary career emerged when his works were studied in whole, and also the for recognizing the chronological development as time passes, how Shakespeare became so mature in his dramatic composition and all. In order to know that Shakespeare's work must be studied in whole. So, in order to recognize that chronological development in Shakespeare's work, they started to examine Shakespeare's work in whole. And Dowden is another critic, Shakespearean critic. He, in Shakespeare, a critical study of his mind and art, is a meticulous work of interpretation, praising Shakespeare's development as a dramatist. See, people began to find Shakespeare works in whole and studied in whole, and also this work is an example for that. Shakespeare, a critical study of his mind and art by Dowden. Romanticism also brought foreign response to Shakespeare's plays from Goethe, Lessing, and Schlegel. Okay, so Romanticism, we can see that foreign responses to Shakespeare also came into being. Non-English critics and literary persons also started to respond to Shakespearean plays like Goethe, Lessing, and Schlegel. So their concentration on Shakespeare's philosophy, moral values, new mystery added a new dimension to Shakespearean criticism. So when foreign people they responded to Shakespearean plays, they concentrated their focus on Shakespearean philosophy, moral values, and new mystery. So the mystery element that is there in Shakespearean philosophy that added a new dimension to Shakespearean criticism. And Elizabethan theatre was studied in the 20th century. Even we can see in Dolimer's works and all. You know, Shakespearean Elizabethan theatre was also studied seriously in the 20th century. Then, influence of Freudian theories were well visible in Ernest John's The Oedipus Complex as an explanation of Hamlet's mystery. You know, we always whenever we study Hamlet during this time, we always refer Hamlet is suffering with the Oedipus complex. So, from where did this idea come? The Oedipus complex is an invention, is an idea by Freud. Freudian idea was a great influence not only to literature but also in many sense it was a great influence in the 20th century. So it was like the influence of Freudian idea is quite visible in Ernest John's criticism of Shakespearean play Hamlet in his work The Oedipus Complex and an Explanation of Hamlet's Mystery. This threw light on Shakespeare's motives in the choices of stuff for his play. So, from lot of sides, Shakespearean plays were began to analyze furthermore in 20th and 21st centuries. Say after post-colonialism, because of post-colonialism, Shakespearean studies were studied under the theories of Shakespearean, under the theory of post-colonialism, such as when we see Othello or Merchant of Venice, whether Shakespeare is racist. So we raise questions like that because of the new light we found in 20th century. In the 20th century, Shakespearean criticism took many turns. So in 20th century, everything related to Shakespeare further again began to study the images and symbols, the pragmatics of Shakespearean theatre, and Elizabethan dramatic methodology were also studied in 20th century. The criticism of Shakespearean drama gives an exposure to positive and negative aspects of the plays. So we can see that many critics they were unbiased when, like Dryden and all, they were unbiased when they analyzed about Shakespeare's dramas, while some others were totally criticizing Shakespeare dramas. But still, they exposed both positive or merits and demerit of Shakespearean plays, and also to the psychological exploration of incidents, situations, motives, and characters. So they actually opened a vast arena in which we can analyze Shakespearean drama in many diverse ways. Psychologically, we can get many more motives, and we will get a great amount of ways in which we can analyze various incidents, situations, and motives and characters that is there in Shakespearean drama. Now let's see list of major critical works on Shakespeare. First one is Shakespeare's own contemporary Robert Greene. He has written Groat's Worth of Wit. Groat's Worth of Wit. And John Dryden, he has published the dramatic poetry of the last age. Thomas Raymer, short view of tragedy. Samuel Johnson, preface to Shakespeare. Walter Wither, specimen of a commentary. Walter Savage Landor, imaginary conversations. Thomas D. Quincy, knocking on the gate in Macbeth. Then William Hazlitt, characters of Shakespeare's plays. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, lectures on Shakespeare. John Keats letters. See, when we have a question about letters, suppose who has written letters and about whom this criticism is. By seeing this title letters, you will never assume that Keats has done such a criticism on Shakespeare in his work letters. So it's very important that you understand, you at least have a vision about such things. And Edmund Dowden, Shakespeare, his mind and art. Next we have R.G. Moulton. He has done a work like Shakespeare as dramatic artist. Then A.C. Bradley, Shakespearean tragedy. Ernest Jones, The Oedipus Complex as an explanation of Hamlet's mystery. L.L. Shuckling, character problems in Shakespeare's plays. Wilson Knight, The Wheel of Fire, The Imperial Theme, The Shakespearean Tempest, The Crown of Life, J. Dover Wilson, The Essential Shakespeare, J. Middleton Murray Shakespeare, F. E. Halliday, uh, The Enjoyment of Shakespeare. Then Baker and Harrison have came up with a work known as a companion to Shakespeare studies. Then Allardyce Nicole has done studies in Shakespeare. Then J.A. Smart, Shakespeare, Truth and Tradition. E.K. Chamber, William Shakespeare. Graville Barker, Face to Shakespeare. Then A. Harbage, Shakespeare's Audience. Then J.C. Adams, Shakespeare's Globe Playhouse. Then Peter Alexander, Shakespeare. Kenneth Muir, Sources, Comedies and Tragedies. So these are some of the major Shakespearean criticism works and their authors. So come back to these points many more times so that you can have a memory about it. Reading it one time and listening to one time doesn't make any change. You cannot remember all of them, or you will get confused. So make necessary notes and make some points, notes somewhere, jot it down, all these important points, jot it down in some paper or book, so that will be very helpful for you to memorize it, believe me. So that's all about in a very brief manner, the criticism of Shakespeare throughout the ages. So about the important works by various critics like Samuel Johnson's preface to Shakespeare and all, we'll be having all these things individually when we discuss that authors in their particular ages. So thank you for watching my video. If you have any questions and queries, suggestions and doubts, you can mention all of that in the comment section, or you can message me or call me and ask me about it. And if you want any help from me, you can obviously call in this number given in the screen. And also you can visit my website for further details related to UGC NET JRF, and a 50% off is going on, guys, so don't miss it. And also you can send your queries and suggestion in the email address as well given in the screen. Okay, so that's all. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel and also press the like button. That will encourage me to create such contents later as well. So that's all. Bye bye. Thank you.